You've seen the Great Wall of China in a photograph, in someone's vacation pictures, that wall that climbs a mountain ridge into the haze. Almost everyone pictures it the same way. Ancient, one continuous structure that stood guard over China since the dawn of its civilization. The wall in that photograph is the work of one dynasty, born out of a flood that drowned a province, broke a government, and put a beggar on the throne. In the summer of 1344, after more than 20 straight days of heavy rain, the Yellow River tore through one embankment in the river's eastern lowlands. Weeks later, it broke through again, further south, at a second embankment. Water stood roughly 6 meters deep over farmland that had never flooded before. 18 districts went under. The court's own record of that summer gives no death count. It gives this instead. The old and the weak drowned where they stood, and everyone strong enough to run ran. By 1351, the river had drifted so far off its old course that it threatened the canal system the empire depended on for grain and salt revenue. The government's answer was to force the river back by hand. An engineer was put in charge, and somewhere between 150,000 and 260,000 laborers were conscripted from the surrounding districts to dig a new channel. The court had set aside wages for the labor, but officials pocketed most of it before it ever reached the men doing the digging. They worked for months, half paid and furious. Then, along the dig route, something turned up in the dirt. A stone statue, carved with a single eye with words cut into its back. Quote, "Do not say the stone man has but one eye. Once this thing appears, all under heaven will revolt." End quote. Leaders of a banned religious sect had buried it themselves months earlier, gambling that this exact discovery would set fire to a labor camp already full of hungry, unpaid men. It worked. Within weeks, tens of thousands of laborers had joined an uprising under red banners. One of the people swept into it was a teenager named Zhu. He wasn't a soldier yet, and he wasn't a rebel leader. He was an orphan. The same famine years that followed the flood had already killed his parents and his older brother. His family was too poor to bury them properly until a neighbor donated land. At 16, he became a monk, mostly because the monastery still had food to give its novices. When even that ran out, he spent 3 years begging across the countryside before he ever joined a rebellion at all. The rebellion spread for the better part of 2 decades. Zhu rose through it, outlasted every rival, and won the largest naval battle medieval China had ever seen. In 1368, his armies took the capital, and the Mongols who had ruled China for a century fled north. Zhu, the beggar monk, declared himself emperor of a new dynasty. He called it Ming, the Brilliant. The advice his own strategists had given him on the way up was 3 lines long. Build high walls, store grain in abundance, and be slow to claim the throne. He'd taken the first 2 literally for years. He was about to take the first one even more literally than that. Here's the strange thing. The dynasty's own court historian, writing only a generation later, warned against telling the story too simply. People will say, he wrote, that all the chaos of the age traces back to the river project and the laborers it exhausted. They're wrong, he insisted. The dynasty fell because of decades of drift and complacency at every level of government, and the road to its collapse was not the work of a single morning or evening. He's right that the rot was already there. He's also, without meaning to, writing exactly the kind of caution that proves the flood mattered. Take away 1344 and that rot stays exactly that. Rot, slow and survivable, the kind every empire carries for a while. There's no forced river project, no 200,000 furious unpaid men in one place, no labor camp for a buried prophecy to ignite. The dynasty that flood produced spent the next 2.5 centuries afraid of exactly what had just happened to the Mongols happening to them. Early on, under their own emperors, they fought offensively, pushing deep into Mongol territory. Then, in 1449, a Mongol army captured a Ming emperor on the battlefield, and that disaster, more than the original founding, is what finally convinced the court the northern border needed something permanent. The wall they built in response, rebuilt in brick and stone on a scale nobody had attempted before, kept climbing those mountains for more than a century after that, well into the 1500s. Exactly the kind of high wall their first emperor had told them to build before he'd even taken the throne. That's the wall in your photograph. Not a monument the Ming raised the moment they took power, but a structure their empire kept building for 150 years, grown out of the same fear of collapse that had built the dynasty in the first place. A fear that started, if you trace it back far enough, with one summer of rain in 1344, a river that wouldn't stay in its banks, and a stone with one eye that somebody buried on purpose.